Good morning. Our prelude today is Feelings by Morris Albert.
Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Orlando. I am Linnea Nelson and I serve on the 1U worship team. Today we welcome the Reverend Kierstin Homblette Allen to our pulpit. Reverend Kierstin grew up in this congregation and is now an affiliated minister of 1U Orlando. She also serves as the director of Beloved Conversations. For more information about our congregation, go to orlandouu.org or email WelcomeTeam@orlandouu.org. After service today is our usual fellowship where we gather with each other and chat. One of the breakout rooms is the Welcome Center, where you can bring any questions you have about our church. Here's the meeting number and passcode, and we'll repeat this slide at the end of worship. All are welcome. And also today is Wrestling with Our Understanding of Racism will meet. First with Reverend Margalie from 11:30 to 12, and then we'll do some planning for the coming year. Do you have ideas for speakers? All are welcome. And Wednesday will be a busy day at 1U. Register to donate blood at 1U on Wednesday, September 8th from 8:30 to 1:30. There are plenty of reservations available. See the chat for the link. All blood types are needed. Please wear a mask and bring an ID. And also on Wednesday, Reverend Margalie will be holding Vespers on the second and fourth Wednesday evenings via Zoom beginning this Wednesday, September 8th, from 6 to 6:30 p.m. Please note the earlier time. And once again, First Unitarian Church of Orlando is planning on participating in the Come Out with Pride 2021 Parade and Festival on Saturday, October 9th, 2021. The board has allocated funds for the event and has secured our space as a bronze sponsor, which will include a space for a float and walkers, as well as 10 by 10 booth at the event. We do need a chairperson, a co-chair, volunteers to help the parade, staff the booth, decorate the trailer, organize handouts, and more. Sounds like a lot of fun and community building. We are hopeful that COVID restrictions will allow the event to continue, but we'll also be working on a backup plan in coordination with our COVID reopening task force. Email prideparade2021@orlandouu.org to volunteer. And finally, you have until September 12th to sign up for covenant groups. You can commit from October to May for a group or choose the drop-in group from 7 to 8:30 on Wednesdays. We will meet online until we can meet in person. Register through the link in the weekly update. Our Share the Plate this month is with Second Harvest Food Bank of Central Florida, which is a private nonprofit organization that collects, stores, and distributes donated food to more than 550 feeding partners in Central Florida. Last year, with the help of numerous donors, volunteers, and a caring, committed community, the food bank distributed enough food for 73 million meals to partner programs such as food pantries, soup kitchens, women's shelters, senior centers, daycare centers, kids cafes. Let's hear more from them.
Mysterious pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan.
We'd be looking at more closures.
With the food supply chain totally disrupted.
The World Health Organization has just declared that this is a pandemic.
When the pandemic first hit, we couldn't really process what was going on. Granted, our community is no stranger to tragedy. We faced them before. But this was something different. Because now, with businesses closed and jobs lost, tens of thousands of people are unsure if they can put food on the table.
There is a growing toll on local food banks trying to keep up with the ongoing demand.
Central Florida's need for food assistance is at an all-time high. But at the same time, so is our spirit. And it's because of your support, Second Harvest is able to bolster their operations and create innovative ways to feed our community. Like the drive-through mobile distributions that safely doubled the meals provided, or new programs like the Bring Hope Home delivery service that brings boxes of food to high-risk individuals. Your generosity even allowed a ballroom to be transformed into a production line and brought our community together like never before.
The Second Harvest Food Bank of Central Florida is doing its part to help the community in a massive way. Every day, it's pumping out 300,000 meals to families in need, doubling pre-virus volume.
This is Mercy Kitchen, a new production facility that allows Second Harvest to increase their capacity for prepared meals.
It's amazing.
It is.
Our job is to make sure everyone eats.
We are helping them survive.
It's because of you people can breathe again. They can hope again. You're saving lives. And while great work is being done, the truth is the fight is far from over. Because too many families are still without jobs and without food. It's projected our economy will take years to recover. During this time, every effort helps. From volunteers to the donors who keep this operation going. No one's promising an easy road ahead. But one thing's for sure, we're in it together.
And please join me in making an offering to support the many ministries of this congregation. Go to orlandouu.org and click the donate button in the upper right corner. Send a text or mail a check. You can also give to our Share the Plate partner directly at their website at feedhopenow.org. Please let us know you donated by dropping a line to Gabby at programassistant1u@gmail.com. It's wonderful being here with you today. Now let us worship together once again.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust our wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust our wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Our call to worship this morning is called Space for New Possibility by the Reverend Gretchen Haley. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? In these days, we find ourselves too often stuck with these questions on repeat. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? We grasp at signs and markers, articles of news and analysis, Facebook memes and forwarded emails, as if this new zodiac were capable of forecasting all that life may yet bring our way. As if we could prepare, as if life had ever made any promises of making sense or turning out the way we'd thought. As if we are not also actors in this still unfolding story. For this hour, we gather to surrender to the mystery, to release ourselves from the needing to know, the yearning to have it all already figured out, and also the burden of believing we either have all the control or none. Here in our song and our silence, our stories and our sharing, we make space for a new breath, a new healing, a new possibility to take root. That is courage forged in the fire of our coming together and felt in the spirit that comes alive in this act of faith. That we believe still a new world is possible. That we are creating it already, here and now. Come, friends, let us worship together. In Unitarian Universalist churches and communities, we light a chalice during worship to set aside this time as sacred. Please join us in the words for our chalice lighting, which are listed in the chat. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share.
Today's story is called While We Can't Hug by Ian McLaughlin and Polly Dunbar. Hedgehog and Tortoise were the best of friends. They wanted to give each other a great big hug, but they weren't allowed to touch. Don't worry, said Owl. There are lots of ways to show someone you love them. Hedgehog tried to wave. That made Tortoise smile. Tortoise made a funny face. That made Hedgehog laugh. Hedgehog wrote a letter, and Tortoise wrote one back. And when Tortoise did a little dance, Hedgehog joined in too. Hedgehog blew a kiss across the gap between them. Tortoise saw it and caught it and kept it. And sent 3 back again. Tortoise sang a song. Hedgehog played along. They both painted pictures so that everyone would know they were friends. Through rain and shine. They could not touch, they could not hug, but they both knew that they were loved. I hope you enjoyed our story today, While We Can't Hug by Ian McLaughlin and Polly Dunbar.
As we make space for the joys and sorrows of this congregation, I invite you to join in our communion of names by adding the names of those who are on your hearts this morning, whether they are there due to a joy or due to a sorrow. Bring your joys and your sorrows with you as we come together here this morning. Come as you are, because your whole self is welcome here in this sacred space we are creating together. Prayers once again for those impacted by COVID, even with all the complexities. May we be free of this pandemic soon, and may we be comforted while we're in it. Continued prayers for the people of Louisiana as they deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, and so many others also in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and other states. Many have had to leave their homes, and others no longer have a home. Our very own Max Beck's hometown in Pennsylvania has been greatly impacted by this hurricane. So keep him and all those impacted by it on your heart and send them prayers. I now invite you into meditative prayer with part of a prayer by Reverend Lynn Cox. Spirit of life, ever adapting and renewing, we come together this morning with yearnings that do not match. We yearn for stability, for even one moment of feeling like we know what is going on, for the ability to predict and prepare for what is coming next. Yet, we also yearn for change. We ache for a world that turns aside from racism, violence, dehumanization, and disregard for suffering. We pray for a change in the illness, grief, isolation, incarceration, and vulnerability of our loved ones. We reach for connections that will remind us that we are worthy as we are, and we reach for connections that will help us to become our best selves. As individuals and as a people, help us to become who we are called to be. Source of wonder, move us to express and live in gratitude for the beauty of this world, the loving people in our lives, and this day of possibility. To this, we add the meditations of our hearts as we enter into a time of silence. May we always be grateful and see the beauty of this world. May we be so blessed.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me? Comfort me tenderly. Will you share some of your feelings with me? If you will show me commitment, then I may learn to love as you do, then I may learn to love.
How are you? How are you? Like most of you, I'm guessing, I get asked this question multiple times a day in the course of normal conversation. How are you? These days, I really don't know how to answer. It feels like any honest answer, any answer that goes deeper than a cursory and automatic, "I'm fine, thanks," requires a host of qualifiers and explanations and feelings I'm not sure the person asking is always ready to receive. How are you? Like me, do you find yourself offering something like, "Well, I'm pandemic okay," or "Given the circumstances, I'm doing all right"? Like this global pandemic we're living through, and many of us are dying in, is like a layer over our lives that can just be brushed to the side or skimmed right over. But really, how often are we given space to say how we actually are? Or how often do we give ourselves the space to explore our real feelings that we're holding just below the surface? Because if we acknowledge them and allow ourselves to feel them, we might not be able to cope. I say this as someone who has had a lot of privilege in my life in general, and especially during this pandemic time. I'm not at risk of losing my housing. I have a job where I work from home. I'm relatively healthy and have the resources to take steps to protect myself with vaccines and masks and distance and health insurance. I have part-time childcare and a spouse who also has job security. I am able to navigate this pandemic with a cushion around me that many don't have. This is part of what I mean when I say, I'm pandemic okay. And, if I'm honest, I'm also stressed and tired and angry and sad and grieving and scared and frustrated and over it. But I don't very often let myself feel those feelings, really feel them, because I still have to function in this pandemic world. I still have to show up to work and get dinner on the table and play with my kid and write sermons and do the laundry and get through the day. But I know that stuffing those feelings down under the surface can only be a short-term solution. They will and do come out, sometimes sideways, when I least expect them. So I'm working on acknowledging their presence to myself and to others, at least a little, instead of just saying that I'm okay. I have a colleague who's a minister in Louisiana. Not only have they been dealing with one of the worst Delta variant COVID outbreaks in the entire world, but now they've been hit with a massive climate change supercharged hurricane and are coping with the intersection of those two death-dealing realities. He's been asked a lot over the last week about how he's doing. People are rightly concerned and checking in on him and his people. On Tuesday, he responded on social media saying, "I've told everyone I'm okay because that's what you're supposed to say. I'm okay as anyone in southern Louisiana can be right now. Because my family and my house are okay, and because I didn't have it as hard as a lot of Louisianans, I say I'm okay. But I'm not okay. I don't think many of us are okay. I live in a culture that sees being okay as a synonym for not needing extraordinary support and help." He continues, "I just need us to acknowledge how miserable this is. Not because I need any particularly unique or greater support than anyone else in my state, but I need us to acknowledge how few of us are actually okay. Even though this particular super hurricane is not ours to deal with in Florida this time around, I imagine our current existence in the COVID cesspool of our country gives us some insight into what my colleague is talking about. I need us to acknowledge how few of us are actually okay, he says. Here, in our community, we're dealing with hospitals at full capacity, including children's hospitals. We're dealing with the constant negotiation of risk. We're coming up against the behavior of other people who are making very different choices than we are for a myriad of reasons, but which put us at risk. We're dealing with politicians prioritizing the economy over the sacredness of human life. We're sending our children to school in facilities with poor ventilation and even poorer public health practices. We're losing jobs and housing and food security and loved ones. We are facing a pandemic with no end in sight. Many of us are not okay. This morning, I'm hoping we can take a little bit of time to explore our pandemic feelings together, to try acknowledging them in ways that might feel vulnerable or uncomfortable. Please take care of yourself as you need to, and be gentle with the most wounded and tender places within yourself. I'm going to intersperse some readings through this sermon, which Reverend Margalie has so graciously agreed to share with you. We'll have a chance to look at 4 big feelings that might be present for you in the context of this pandemic: sorrow, fear, anger, and grief. Of course, there are a myriad of other feelings that may be coursing through our minds and hearts and spirits every day. Anxiety, dread, loneliness, overwhelm, confusion, despair, exhaustion, and depression all come to mind for me. I would strongly encourage all of us to continue to try to feel and explore these feelings as they come up for us, not just brushing them off or pushing them down. But for today, in our short time together, we'll go deeper with these 4. I invite you to engage in this exploration either through writing notes on a piece of paper, typing text into your phone or other device, or by making a space for visualization in your mind, whichever works best and is most accessible for you. Let's take a moment to breathe together as folks prepare. We begin this morning with an exploration of sorrow and our first reading from Reverend Margalie.
Sorrow by Linnea Nelson. My sorrow is unbound, streaming outward in all directions. I want to curl up on the sofa, my head and body under a blanket, to feel it all, there in the dark where no one can see me. I'll capture the sorrow and keep it close to me. I need to feel unbound for a while.
My sorrow is unbound, says our reading. It's like that with sorrow, isn't it? Sometimes we hold our sadness close, cradling it like a precious thing. And sometimes it's uncontainable, streaming outward in all directions, unable to be controlled or reeled back in. The sadness of this pandemic time is one of both incredible collective sadness, the sadness of loss on a scale of magnitude that we rarely witness in this country, of death and illness and long-term devastation visiting nearly every family and community. And it's the sadness of each individual life lost, of each personal relationship cut off too soon, each family member in the hospital, each child or daughter or friend struggling to breathe, to recover. Beyond and between death and illness, there are other sadnesses too, created or compounded by this pandemic. The sorrow of milestones missed, a canceled graduation, a baby's first steps while an essential worker parent is on an overtime shift, a non-refundable, long-saved-for trip, the lost chance to see a loved one again, perhaps for the last time. It's the sorrow of what could have been, a job lost, an opportunity missed, a once-in-a-lifetime chance meeting never to happen. It's the child who has fallen further behind in their learning after a year of attempting virtual school without stable internet or a parent available to supervise. It's the sorrow of less tangible losses, mental, emotional, or physical health neglected or exacerbated by long periods of isolation or postponed medical care. It's the loss of our sense of closeness to each other, missing the ways that body language or small expressions passing across the face that tell us so much but are impossible to see on Zoom or on the phone. The sad longings for those pieces of our lives that we found so fulfilling but are impossible to access in pandemic times. That volunteer gig that we love, that activist work that's no longer safe, the community chorus where we join our voices into one glorious note, sustaining it ever longer as we take turns breathing. I could keep going, but I want to ask you, where does your sorrow lie? What sadness is tugging at your heart or bursting unbound into all the corners of your life? Sometimes we might feel like we can't be sad about these smaller things, that we're somehow not allowed to be when there's also really big sadness in the world. But that's simply not true. Our feelings are our feelings. Our sorrow is real, no matter its size. I invite you to feel it now, to touch it carefully, to respect its power and truth, and then to write, type, draw, or think about it, about the shape of your sorrow. Name it for yourself, specifically. Acknowledge its presence within you. In this silent moment that follows, use it to connect to all those around you who are feeling their own sadnesses. We are together in our sorrow.
Fear by Reverend Megan Lloyd Joyner. I would like to speak eloquently about fear, but I do not know what to say except that we are becoming accustomed to it. Everyone, even those we love, is a threat, a potential risk, a possible death sentence. We cross the street, we usher children away. 6 feet is beginning to feel not far enough. We are alone and we are afraid.
Do you remember the fear of the early pandemic days last spring? when we had no idea what this thing was, how it was spreading, how to stay safe. Do you remember wiping down your packages or letting your mail sit for days before you opened it? Do you remember the empty shelves at the grocery store? There were so many unknowns. Do you recall that there were no masks available and there were so many kind souls, maybe in this congregation, who made hundreds of masks at home for healthcare workers and children? The comforting hum of the sewing machine assuring us we were doing something to help when so little else was in our control. In some ways, that feels like years ago, and in others, it's just yesterday. We know so much more now about this disease and the pandemic it's caused, thanks to incredible scientists and researchers and public health workers. We have new options that keep us safer, like vaccines and tested treatments and protocols for severe COVID cases. And yet, fear remains with us, only in new shapes and textures. How sick will the side effects of the vaccine make me? Did I stand far enough away from my neighbor when we chatted in our front yard? If I'm vaccinated and I get COVID, but I don't have symptoms, will I unknowingly pass it to my loved ones? Will our children get COVID at school even if they wear a mask? Is it too risky to have a party in the backyard or eat inside a restaurant or worship in person? There's a new layer too for some of us, as Reverend Joyner reminds us in our reading. We're becoming accustomed to being afraid. It feels normal to have to assess risk constantly, to have to weigh unknowns, to make impossible choices or have no choices at all. It's become hard to imagine hugging someone outside of your pod or shaking the hand of a stranger without at least a little bit of fear. Our youngest children know very well to stay 6 feet apart and to worry when people around them are not wearing masks. I fear the ways that this time will stay with them, how that fear will be in their bones. We must acknowledge, of course, that there are many of us for whom fear is not new, who are very familiar with the feeling that things are not in your control and that there are no good choices, who live with the knowledge even before this pandemic that other people are not putting their interests first or even actively trying to harm them. I'm thinking here of people living in poverty, people living with disabilities, children in foster care, Black, Indigenous, and people of color targeted by racist systems, transgender and non-binary people, and so many others. And those people too are here living through and dying in this same pandemic, but in greater numbers than those of us with some privilege. And, both and here, as I said when we were exploring sorrow, this does not mean that all fear is not valid or important or worth acknowledging and reflecting on, even if this is a new feeling for you. I want to ask, what are you afraid of? What fear is gripping your heart, keeping you up at night? What threats are you becoming accustomed to? I invite you to feel it now, to touch it carefully, to respect its power and truth, and then to write, draw, type, or think about it, about the shape of your fear. Name it for yourself, specifically, and acknowledge its presence within you. In the silent moment that follows, use it to connect to all of those around you who are also feeling afraid for whatever reason. We are together in our fear.
Breathe by Reverend Lynn Unger. Breathe, said the wind. How can I breathe at a time like this when the air is full of smoke, of burning tires, burning lives? Just breathe, the wind insisted. Easy for you to say if the weight of injustice is not wrapped around your throat, cutting off all air. I need you to breathe. I need you to breathe. Don't tell me to be calm when there are so many reasons to be angry, so much cause for despair. I didn't say to be calm, said the wind. I said to breathe. We're going to need a lot of air to make this hurricane together.
Of all of my emotions that lie just beneath the surface, I think anger is the most difficult to access. I think this is part of my upbringing as a white woman in this wider culture, trained by society to keep the peace and avoid conflict at all costs. Maybe this is true for some of you too. I remember a bit that President Obama did toward the end of his second presidency at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He was giving one of his standard speeches, and then he brought onto the podium comedian Keegan-Michael Key, who he introduced as Luther, his anger translator. Do some of you remember this? Obama then proceeded with his speech offering platitudes and measured commentary. And Luther loudly and emphatically said what President Obama was really thinking or feeling. It was hilarious. As President Obama is so notoriously cool and collected, to hear his translator really let loose with strong opinions and really controversial truths. It was so relatable to me to wish to have someone standing right behind me to really speak my mind and emote freely. Although there was, of course, this extra layer of meaning for Obama to have an anger translator, to have the freedom to really say what he thinks when, as our first Black president, he could never afford to come across as angry or emotional, so as not to fall into racist tropes about angry Black people. I've thought about that bit so often during this pandemic, when I keep my anger and my real opinions to myself for the sake of the feelings of others, or keeping the peace, or to not make enemies all the time, as there's so much to be angry about. I'm angry at our governor playing callous politics with people's lives and with our children's safety. I am angry at conservative pundits and politicians convincing their followers not only to skip vaccinations and masks, but to take medicine meant for animals as treatment for COVID, a disease many of them denied even existed. I am angry at every person I see at the grocery store without a mask on, not knowing their reasons for not wearing one, but absolutely knowing that I have to go home to care for my unvaccinated child and risk passing a disease to her that her small, vulnerable body has never encountered before. I am angry at all of those people protesting mask mandates in the name of their personal bodily freedom and autonomy, and then turning around and supporting the dismantling of abortion rights. I am angry at big business and politicians hungry for profit, ignoring the science about climate change over the last 50 years in the name of capitalism. So now people all over the world face unimaginable and preventable suffering, compounded by a global pandemic. I am filled with rage, thinking about the Black people, my beloveds and neighbors, who continue to be harassed, arrested, assaulted, and killed by police officers using military-grade weapons and unchecked racist bias, who seem unwilling and unable to stop, even in the face of worldwide uprisings and demands for justice and systemic change and abolition. even as, at the very same time, those Black and brown people are also more likely to get sick and die from COVID, a legacy of our racist health systems, discriminatory government policies, and growing economic inequality. There is so much to be angry about. There is so much rage within us if we are paying close attention. And when we don't allow it to come to the surface, when our anger translator speaks only in our head, we stifle these strong feelings and they have nowhere to go. No release, no resolution. They fester within us, negatively impacting our health, our relationships, our capacity to be authentic human beings. When we stifle feelings like anger, we often shift instead to numbness, which means we also lose out on feeling other emotions like joy and pleasure. And when we stifle our collective anger, we deny the power of the hurricane that Reverend Unger refers to in her poem. We lose out on the power of this storm of emotion to call attention to big truths, to state unequivocally, this is not okay with us. The power to change things for the better. Especially in this pandemic moment when there's so much that needs changing, so much that our anger could help to shift. I could keep going, but I want to ask you, what are you angry about? What rage is simmering under the surface or maybe bubbling over into your life? What is your anger translator saying in your head that you wish you could say out loud? I invite you to feel it now, to touch it carefully, to respect its power and truth, and then write, type, draw, or think about it, about the shape of your anger. Name it for yourself, name it specifically, and acknowledge its presence within you. In the silence that follows, use it to connect to all those around you who are feeling a similar or perhaps a completely different rage. We are together in our anger.
Mourn by Kierstin. Don't forget to mourn properly, the way you don't want anyone to see. Wailing, thrashing, heaving with each breath, releasing, purging. Mourn all that you have lost, who you have lost, both in passing over or through, leaving behind an emptiness that draws up and squeezes heartily. Mourn with no regard to place or time, feeling deeply the etching of each second across the bare skin, leaving behind canyons to fill. Mourn until eyes, bleary and aching, strain to see. Mourn until your chest unclenches and breath eases. Mourn until your spirit sighs with relief, settles and snores. Mourn.
Don't forget to mourn, our reading reminds us. It's amazing in some ways, with death and grief surrounding us on all sides, that we might forget to notice it, to mark it, to wail and thrash and heave because of it. But in other ways, the constancy of the grief, the illness, the death, the sheer numbers of the sick and hurting is so great that we almost cannot process it. There have been very few public rituals to mark the passing of our country's pandemic dead. We don't take time to stop and mourn, because perhaps if we started, we might never stop. 650,000 souls lost in our country alone is a number that is difficult to comprehend, let alone process. But every one of those people had a unique life and a distinct personality, and people who loved them, and a story to tell. In our reading, Jakaran Olaoya moves with us through the cycle of grief, ending in a place of relief and rest. She's reminding us here, too, that the mourning process, as much as we may not want to give ourselves over to it, is necessary for us to get to the other side of grief, that the only way is through. She is not alone in this notion. There are many wise writers who've imagined that our collective pain and suffering can serve as a catalyst, propelling us through towards something new, towards being a people and a place we have never been. The pandemic is a portal, says author Arundhati Roy. Historically, she writes, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to move through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can move through it lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. It is, however, impossible to imagine another world if we pretend like we are not impacted by the realities of this one. If we pretend we're just okay, ignore and push aside our feelings and cling to ideas about just getting back to normal. If we cannot access our sorrow, our fear, our anger, our grief, we cannot use them as tools for systemic change, as reasons to say, none of this is okay with me. To say, we simply cannot continue on in this way. If we refuse to acknowledge our feelings and share them with others by way of connection and building power, if we sit in denial, then nothing can change. Zen priest, the Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, points us toward the hope that can emerge from collectively acknowledging our feelings and deciding to act on them. She says, there is something dying in our society, in our culture, and there's something dying in us individually. And what is dying is the willingness to be in denial. The willingness to be in denial is dying in us in a meaningful number. We're reaching a tipping point. It's always been happening, and when it happens in enough of us in a short enough period of time, at the same time, then you have a tipping point and the culture begins to shift. And where I feel like people are at now is, no, bring it on. I have to face it. We have to face it. Hope emerges here for me. Out of this tipping point, out of this collective facing of the truth, out of the power and possibility that is held in our authentic living and the ways we connect with each other on a human level, how we are real with each other. It begins when we say, no, you know what? I'm not okay. We're not okay. None of this is okay. Then we can begin to work together to make it different and better, to fight for another world. For even while we cannot hug each other, there are so many ways to show our love.
Hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. The part of you that is not alright, yeah, is also the part that loves the light. And the part of you that is suffering is the part that calls in change. And you don't have to feel ashamed. There is nothing to forgive. The part of you that is crying out is the part that wants to live. Yeah, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. When your world is burning down, well, getting hot is a sane reaction, but one in need of action, because your spirit needs protection. So gather up your sinew and gather up your faction. Hope is not a feeling, hope is an action. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes. We are not alright. I said, hope comes. We are not alright. I'm gonna fall down on my knees. That's not living. I'm gonna say, will you help me please? That's not living. I'm gonna say I'm not alright. That's not living. I'm just trying to make it through this night. Yeah. That's not living. I'm gonna fall down on my knees. Yeah. Oh, will we say, help me please? Help me please. We can say, hey, we are not alright. We are not alright. We can help each other get through the night. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 'Cause hope comes from the center of the hurt, in the middle of the dirt. We'll plant a seed and watch it grow into something we don't already know.
Please join us in these words for extinguishing our chalice, which can be found in the chat. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
That was a big one.
Our benediction this morning comes from the Reverend Anya Samler Michael, entitled Benediction for a People in Pandemic. When faced with a challenge such as this, we can turn toward one another, or we can turn against. We can ignore the cries of our neighbors, or we can let them cry into the arms of our witness. We can respond with indifference to systemic injustice, or we can commit to its undoing. Good souls, tales will be told of how we responded when this particular hell was visited upon our earth. Let us know, and let it be said by generations to come, that when the pain of our separation was revealed, we moved closer to the promised land of our beloved community. Amen.
Spirit of life, come Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.